This, madame, is Versailles.
This phrase has already become iconic, a symbol of luxury, elegance, extravagance, and, at times, the absurdity of Versailles and its residents. Today, we'll talk about the woman who embodied all of that, Queen Marie Antoinette. What did her day actually look like? Why being queen was not the dream job? And why was life in Versailles more of a torment than a dream for the aristocracy? All that, and more in today's video. Welcome back to Female Tales. I'm Yulia, and together on this channel, we explore the stories of remarkable women from history. If history speaks to you, like the video, join our community, and let's head straight into the depths of the past. Let us travel back to the morning of May 16th, 1770. It's 9:30 a.m. This is the moment when Marie Antoinette arrived at the Palace of Versailles. On the very same day, she would marry the Dauphin of France, Louis Auguste, in the royal chapel. This wedding would later be described by contemporaries as the finest royal wedding anyone had ever seen. A beginning worthy of any beautiful fairy tale. But, as we know, this fairy tale would end in tragedy. At this point, though, the 14-year-old Austrian Archduchess had no idea what fate had in store for her. And so, together with her, we step into the world of Versailles to see what life was truly like inside its gilded walls. For the next 15 minutes, you're no longer yourself. You're a noble lady at the French court. And if you've ever imagined Versailles as the most refined, luxurious place on earth, you wouldn't be entirely wrong, but only partially right. Because behind the beauty of its grand facades, Versailles was, in truth, a giant ant-hill of aristocrats, bound by a rigid hierarchy and an endless list of rules, many of which were absolutely absurd. Château de Versailles became the main royal residence and the gravitational centre of all French nobility, thanks to none other than the Sun King himself, Louis XIV. Originally, this place was nothing more than a modest hunting lodge, but it was Louis who transformed the Château de Versailles into the lavish palace we know today, the very place we've now stepped into. The king's construction project stretched across his entire life. New wings, galleries, and gardens were constantly being added. In total, he spent the astronomical sum of 100 million livres, the equivalent of about $2 billion today. But for the Sun King, Versailles was more than just a home. It was a symbol of his power. And by gathering the nobility under one roof, like scorpions in a jar, he could keep them closer and control them more effectively. At its peak during Louis XIV's reign, Versailles housed between 3,000 and 10,000 people, despite having only around 700 rooms. I mean, did they sleep standing up? By the time young Marie Antoinette arrived, around 6,000 people had gathered just to see her. Now pause for a moment and imagine. What kind of infrastructure does a place need to host that many people? And was it even remotely comfortable? Those luxurious apartments with sweeping views of the gardens, the ones we always see in movies, were strictly reserved for members of the royal family, the king's mistresses, and his closest inner circle. Everyone else, even high-ranking nobles, often had to make do with cramped attic rooms. Poorly furnished, freezing in winter, stifling in summer, and sometimes shared with rats. Still, aristocrats gave up the comfort of their own chateau and squeezed into Versailles, all for the sake of being close to the king and for a chance at influence within the court. While members of the royal family had access to luxurious bathing suites and private toilets, everyone else had to settle for public washrooms, shared baths, or, more commonly, chamber pots and dry wiping. Daily bathing? That was a privilege reserved strictly for those at the very top of the court hierarchy. Take Marie Antoinette, for example. She bathed every single day using herbal soap and something called pigeon water, whatever that means. Some of her bathing sessions reportedly lasted up to 4 hours. Meanwhile, the public toilets of Versailles were so far from the main living quarters that you'd probably have to sprint to reach them. And once there, you'd find lines just as long as the ones at modern train stations. Times change, but some things don't. Because of the inconvenience, servants would often just empty chamber pots straight out of the windows, until an official decree had to be issued explicitly forbidding this. It wasn't uncommon to witness scenes like the one described by German Princess Elizabeth Charlotte, who wrote, "The people stationed in the galleries in front of our room piss in all the corners. It is impossible to leave one's apartments without seeing somebody pissing." So yes, imagine what that must have smelled like. Still, to be fair, there were some attempts at hygiene. People changed their underlinen several times a day. The elaborate wigs were carefully combed and shaken out to get rid of fleas. And perfume was used liberally to mask unpleasant odours. So liberally, in fact, that Louis XIV often demanded the windows be flung open during court balls. By the time Marie Antoinette arrived at Versailles, though, the palace was significantly more hygienic. Cleanliness had improved, at least compared to what it was back in the late 17th century. Naturally, when thousands of aristocrats gather in one place, they need all kinds of services, from horseshoes and fine clothing to food and drink. So it's no surprise that an entire town quickly sprang up around the palace to meet those needs. Now, tell me honestly, would you want to live in this royal dormitory? Because, to be honest, I'm starting to have doubts. Running water and proper plumbing suddenly feel like priceless luxuries. Now, let's move on to one of the most fascinating and, frankly, exhausting aspects of life at Versailles: court etiquette. Everything, and I mean everything, was dictated by a strict code of conduct. You could greet the Queen first, when you were allowed to stand up from the table, and even something as simple as sitting on a chair required careful consideration. First of all, you weren't allowed to sit in the presence of a royal family member, unless you had specific permission. And even if you did, you had to know exactly which type of chair you were allowed to use. For instance, only the king, the queen, and visiting monarchs from other countries could sit on chairs with armrests. Members of the royal family, like the king's children, siblings, or cousins, could use chairs without armrests. Duchesses, they were permitted to sit on stools. Everyone else had to remain standing. And the best part? The rules could change every time someone entered or left the room. Just imagine the constant chaos. It was like an aristocratic version of musical chairs. As I mentioned earlier, you couldn't just start a conversation with someone of higher rank. They had to speak to you first. This rule became quite the problem for Madame du Barry when Marie Antoinette first arrived at court. Du Barry wasn't allowed to address her directly, not until the young Dauphin said something first. Both Madame du Barry and the king were thrilled when Marie Antoinette finally threw her a short, almost reluctant phrase. But during moments of entertainment, like masked balls, that rule was temporarily lifted. So technically, yes, you might have had a chance to exchange a word or two with the Queen, assuming you caught her in the right mood. And speaking of etiquette absurdities, here's another almost comedic example, taken straight from the film. And, yes, entirely accurate, the royal dressing ceremony. This daily ritual was called the levee, the ceremonial waking and dressing of the monarch. There was also a nighttime equivalent called the coucher, for the royal bedtime routine. Crowds of nobles filled the royal apartments, waiting for their turn to assist with the smallest task, handing over a glove, tying a ribbon, offering a handkerchief. And whether you were allowed inside, and how close you could stand, all depended on your rank. There were two levels: the grand lever for the outer circle of privileged nobles, and the petty lever for those in the Queen or King's innermost circle. In fact, the Sun King famously sold the right to assist him while he sat on the royal chamber pot. Why? Because it gave people a rare moment to ask him a favour, one-on-one, while he was, let's say, occupied. Clearly, Versailles was not a place for the shy or the squeamish. Marie Antoinette herself described this experience in a letter to her mother in 1770. At 11 o'clock, I have my hair done. At noon, all the world can enter. I put on my rouge and wash my hands in front of the whole world. Then, the gentlemen leave, and the ladies remain. and I am dressed in front of them. As you can probably imagine, participating in this constant royal spectacle was absolutely exhausting, which is why both kings and queens often tried to escape it. Once she became queen, Marie Antoinette preferred to spend the night at the Petit Trianon or in other royal residences where she could avoid these suffocating rituals. Honestly, that kind of constant attention sounds like my worst nightmare, because, in truth, the King and Queen of France were never alone ever. Even Marie Antoinette's childbirth was a public event, in line with Versailles tradition, so that witnesses could verify the legitimacy of the royal heir. Now, it wasn't literally a crowd gathered around staring at her. Her husband made sure a canopy-like structure was set up to shield her somewhat. But still, giving birth in a room full of courtiers? No, thank you. Would you be willing to live with that level of exposure? And then there was another essential piece in the Versailles hierarchy, the dress code. Louis XIV introduced a long list of strict rules on how one should dress at court. He was the first to wear red high heels. Yes, back then it was perfectly fashionable for both men and women. And he decreed that only his favourites could wear red heels. So yes, Louis XIV basically invented the VIP Louboutin Club. When visiting the Grand Couvert, a public dinner where courtiers could watch the royal family eat, men were required to wear a sword. And if you didn't have one, you could rent it at the entrance to Versailles. Yes, really. Every occasion required the right outfit. Men had to wear the extravagant habit habillé, a formal coat made of velvet, silk, or satin. Women wore the grand habit de cour, a heavily embroidered gown with bare shoulders. Naturally, outfits had to be changed depending on the time of day and the nature of the event. Even for aristocrats, keeping up with the dress code was ruinously expensive. Some were nearly bankrupted trying to maintain appearances at court. When it came to embracing Versailles' extravagant dress code, Marie Antoinette truly excelled. Her obsession with fashion, and the staggering spending that came with it, may well have been her way of coping with the stress of an unconsummated marriage, the pressure of not producing an heir, and constant scrutiny from her mother and the court. For 7 long years, the young royal couple struggled with this issue, partly due to inexperience, and reportedly certain physical challenges on Louis's part. But back to fashion, Marie Antoinette's favourite escape. In 1776 alone, she spent 100,000 livres on accessories alone. Her total wardrobe allowance for that year, 120,000 livres. Each week, she received bills for 4 new pairs of shoes, daily orders of 3 yards of ribbon and 2 yards of green taffeta. Modistes like the legendary Rose Bertin and Madame Eloff made regular visits to Versailles, presenting new designs and sewing fresh gowns and headpieces. Naturally, the young and stylish Dauphine soon became the ultimate fashion icon. Her looks, especially her towering hairstyles and daring silhouettes, became the talk of Europe. Even her mother took notice, writing, "I must mention a subject upon which all the gazettes enlarge, and that is your dress. They speak of hairdressing, a coiffure of 36 inches high from the roots of the hair with feathers and ribbons above that again. You know my opinion. To follow fashion in moderation, never to excess. A young and pretty queen has no need of follies." Marie Antoinette replied, "It is true, I am rather taken up with dress, but as to feathers, everyone wears them, and it would seem extraordinary if I did not. Oh, how one wishes she had listened to her mother's wise advice! And how fortunate, perhaps, that Maria Theresia did not live to witness her daughter losing her head, in part because of that very obsession with appearances. But then again, she was 14. Think back to yourself at that age. Now imagine being handed a limitless credit card." She also leaned heavily into makeup, another Versailles tradition popularised by Louis XIV, who adored the theatre and made stage makeup a fashionable requirement for his court. It was common to apply bright rouge in wide, circular swirls, a sign of noble status. In fact, it was forbidden to wear rouge outside the court. Faces were powdered heavily, often ghost white. Young Mozart, after visiting Versailles, described the court's makeup as detestable makeup unbearable to the eyes of an honest German. Even Marie Antoinette's own brother, Emperor Joseph II, couldn't resist mocking her appearance. And then, after becoming queen in 1774 at just 18 years old, she discovered yet another passion: diamonds. A taste her husband often had to cover financially, as the expenses far exceeded her official allowance. As Count Mercy wrote, the monarch received this demand with his customary gentleness, only saying mildly he was not astonished to find the queen penniless, considering her taste for diamonds. And with cruel irony, it was the diamond necklace affair, a scandal she had no real part in, that would become the final spark before the fire of the French Revolution. After giving birth to her children, Marie Antoinette's style noticeably changed. Her fashion became less extravagant, and her spending decreased significantly. She began wearing simple muslin dresses, often without a corset, a look that marked the beginning of a new era of natural simplicity. You could say she was the original 18th century clean girl. But by then, it was too late. In the eyes of the public, her reputation was already sealed. She was known as Madame Deficit. At the end of August 1787, a new portrait of Marie Antoinette with her children by Elisabeth Louise Vigée-Lebrun was scheduled to be unveiled at the Paris Salon. But due to the Queen's growing unpopularity, the painting had to be withdrawn. The empty frame remained on display, and someone pinned a note to it that read, "Behold the deficit." The irony? When Marie Antoinette first arrived in France, the national budget deficit already stood at 22 million livres, and she was far from the only royal known for spending. Louis XVI's aunts once spent 3 million livres during a 6-week spa retreat in Vichy. The king's younger brother, the Count of Artois, racked up debts totaling 21 million livres. And who paid for all of this? The crown, and by extension, of course, the ordinary people of France. So, what did a typical day in Versailles look like for the young Marie Antoinette? Surely she wasn't just bathing and getting dressed all day. After the morning ceremonies, she usually attended Mass. Then came the Grand Couvert, the public royal lunch where she and her husband dined before the eyes of their subjects. Although Marie Antoinette is often portrayed as a lover of sweets, and wrongly credited with the infamous phrase, "let them eat cake," which she never actually said. In reality, her eating habits were rather modest. One of her ladies-in-waiting, Madame Campan, noted that the Queen ate very little. She started her day with hot chocolate and a bit of pastry or bread, and for the rest of the day, drank mostly water and ate small portions of poultry. She rarely drank alcohol and never ate after 10 p.m. Here's how she described her routine in a letter to her mother. "Then, I am with the Dauphin for a time, and when he has business to do, I retire to my own room, where I read, write, or work needlework, for I am embroidering the king a coat. At 3 o'clock, I go again to my aunt's, with whom the king is at this hour. At 4, the abbé comes to me, and at 5, my clavecin teacher, or singing master, till 6. At 6:30, I almost always go to my aunt's, unless I go out from 7 till 9. We play cards." Speaking of cards, they would later become one of Marie Antoinette's many reputational pitfalls. In 1777 alone, she lost 500,000 livres gambling. As the Count of Mercy observed, the Queen now plays very high. She no longer enjoys games where the stakes are limited. Another youthful indulgence. That would cost her dearly. But perhaps her greatest passion was the theatre. Marie Antoinette loved performing, especially dressing up and playing charming shepherdesses or peasant girls. In 1780, she even had her own private theatre built at the Petit Trianon. There, she staged comedies and operas, often under her personal patronage. Works by Gluck, Sacchini, and Grétry were regularly performed. In fact, the first French performance of The Barber of Seville took place in her theatre. As I mentioned earlier, the Petit Trianon, that idyllic little retreat, became Marie Antoinette's true refuge. It was there that she finally found solitude and began to truly embrace motherhood, which would transform her deeply. Because, yes, she did undergo personal growth, even if history rarely gives her credit for it. Her journey as a mother was marked by tragedy. She suffered several miscarriages, and 2 of her children would die young. The light-hearted, carefree woman who once glided through the mirrored halls of Versailles became a heavier, more somber figure, weighed down by grief and a life that had changed beyond recognition. But when the winds of the French Revolution began to blow, Versailles slowly emptied. Many nobles began spending more and more time in Paris, and the palace, once the vibrant centre of royal life, started to lose its place in the rhythm of French power. Then came the days of October 5th and 6th, 1789. The royal family was forced to leave Versailles forever and make their final journey to Paris. That morning, an angry mob, furious over bread prices, stormed the palace. Marie Antoinette had to flee her bedroom through a hidden passage to escape the enraged crowd, mostly women. But in the end, the Queen, the King, their children, and what remained of the court, were escorted to Paris. It was there, after years of imprisonment, that Marie Antoinette was executed on October 16th, 1793. Did she, in those final moments, remember the happier days she and her children had spent in Versailles? One can only wonder. Even before her death, over 17,000 pieces of furniture and decor were stripped from Versailles and sold at auction. The palace itself was open to the public as a museum. After the monarchy was briefly restored, Versailles was refurbished, and it would shine once again, most notably during Queen Victoria's visit in 1855, and later, in key moments of France's turbulent political history. But no matter how many emperors and presidents walked its halls after her, in the eyes of history, Versailles may will always belong to Marie Antoinette. So, tell me, would you rather find yourself in Versailles of the 17th or 18th century? Or is it safer and wiser to stroll through its grand halls today without worrying about the French guillotine? And if you've been to Versailles, especially the Queen's legendary bedroom, don't forget to share your impressions in the comments. Where should we travel in time next? Let me know below. See you in the next video.